was called into Brian's office, and I could tell he was agitated, pacing up and down and, sort of biting his fingernails, so to speak. After about 3 or 4 minutes, he turned around and said, "Pete, I've got bad news for you. In a nutshell, the boys want you out, and they want Ringo Starr in."
What happens when creative differences turn into all-out war? Before you clicked on this video, you're probably wondering which famous musicians got the boot, why their bandmates turned against them, and how brutal these breakups really were. Today, we're diving into 10 shocking stories of musicians who were ruthlessly kicked out of the very bands they helped create. From backstage betrayals to public humiliations, these aren't just career changes. They're musical massacres that changed rock history forever. 1. Pete Best. The Beatles, before Ringo Starr ever sat behind a drum kit for the Beatles, there was Pete Best. For 2 crucial years, Best was the heartbeat of the Fab Four, playing hundreds of gigs in Hamburg's seedy clubs and Liverpool's Cavern Club. But in August 1962, just as the Beatles were about to sign their first recording contract, Best received the most devastating phone call in rock history. Manager Brian Epstein delivered the brutal news. The other 3 Beatles wanted him out. No discussion, no warning, just a cold dismissal after years of friendship and musical partnership. The official reason was that his drumming wasn't good enough for recording, but rumors swirled about jealousy over Best's popularity with female fans and his refusal to adopt the group's new hairstyle. Best was so devastated, he didn't play drums again for 2 years, watching from the sidelines as his former bandmates conquered the world. 2. Dave Mustaine, Metallica.
Dave Mustaine!
Speaking of brutal dismissals, few musicians have channeled their rage from being fired quite like Dave Mustaine. In 1983, Metallica was just another hungry metal band trying to make it in the San Francisco Bay Area scene. Mustaine was their lead guitarist and primary songwriter, crafting the aggressive riffs that would define their early sound. But Mustaine's volatile personality and escalating alcohol and drug problems created constant tension within the band. The final straw came during a tour when his erratic behavior became too much for his bandmates to handle. James Hetfield, Lars Ulrich, and Cliff Burton made the decision to kick him out, literally putting him on a bus back to California with nothing but his guitar and a burning desire for revenge. That revenge came in the form of Megadeth, the thrash metal band Mustaine formed specifically to show Metallica what they'd lost. The bitter rivalry between the 2 bands would fuel some of the greatest metal albums ever recorded. 3. Izzy Stradlin, Guns N' Roses.
If you look at GNR, how we started, it was just, 2 guitars, bass, drums, and vocals.
While Axl Rose's volatile personality often dominated headlines, Izzy Stradlin was arguably the creative backbone of Guns N' Roses during their Imperial phase. He co-wrote most of their biggest hits and provided the steady rhythm guitar foundation that anchored their chaotic sound. But by 1991, as the band prepared for their massive Use Your Illusion tour, Stradlin had grown tired of the dysfunction. The breaking point came when Stradlin got sober and watched his bandmates spiral deeper into addiction and ego battles. He attempted to negotiate a reduced touring schedule to maintain his sanity, but the band refused. Rather than being fired, Stradlin made the painful decision to walk away from millions of dollars in global superstardom. His departure marked the beginning of the end for the original Guns N' Roses lineup, proving that sometimes the most brutal dismissal is the one you give yourself. 4. Jason Newsted, Metallica.
But that was my last performance with Metallica. Appropriately, the song Fade to Black.
Jason Newsted thought he had won the lottery when Metallica recruited him to replace the late Cliff Burton in 1986. For 15 years, the years he anchored the rhythm section through the band's most commercially successful period, contributing to albums like Master of Puppets' reissue and the Black Album. But beneath the surface, Newsted was fighting a losing battle for creative respect. James Hetfield and Lars Ulrich consistently shut down his songwriting contributions and side projects, treating him more like a hired gun than a full band member. The final insult came when they refused to let him pursue his side project, Echo Brain, claiming it would interfere with Metallica's commitments. In 2001, Newsted had enough and announced his departure, citing the band's unwillingness to accept his creative input. His exit left Metallica scrambling and led to the tumultuous period documented in the Some Kind of Monster documentary. 5. Sammy Hagar, Van Halen. When David Lee Roth left Van Halen in 1985, Sammy Hagar seemed like the perfect replacement. His powerful voice and more serious approach to songwriting helped the band achieve their greatest commercial success with albums like 5150 and OU 812. For over a decade, the Van Hagar era dominated rock radio and MTV. But by the late 1990s, tensions between Hagar and Eddie Van Halen had reached a boiling point. Eddie's increasing control over the band's direction and his struggles with substance abuse created a toxic environment. The situation exploded during the recording of Van Halen 3 when Eddie abruptly fired Hagar via a phone call, citing musical differences. Hagar later revealed that Eddie had been secretly working with other singers behind his back, making the dismissal even more humiliating. The Red Rockers' 17-year tenure with one of rock's biggest bands ended not with a celebration, but with bitter lawsuits and public feuds. 6. Glenn Matlock, Sex Pistols. The Sex Pistols were supposed to be the voice of rebellious youth, but internal politics proved just as corrupt as the establishment they railed against. Glenn Matlock was the band's original bassist and primary songwriter, crafting the melodic foundations for punk anthems like Anarchy in the UK and God Save the Queen. However, Matlock's middle-class background and musical competence clashed with manager Malcolm McLaren's vision of the band as working-class chaos merchants. When Matlock dared to admit he liked the Beatles and questioned some of Johnny Rotten's more extreme antics, he sealed his fate. In February 1977, just as the band was gaining notoriety, McLaren and the other members kicked him out, replacing him with Sid Vicious, a man who couldn't even play bass but looked the part perfectly. Matlock watched from the sidelines as his musical contributions helped launch a cultural revolution, while his replacement became a tragic icon of punk's self-destructive mythology. 7. Brian Jones, The Rolling Stones.
What a crazy sound, but they never stop rocking.
Brian Jones didn't just get fired from the Rolling Stones. He was slowly and methodically pushed out by the band he had founded. As the group's original leader and multi-instrumentalist, Jones was responsible for their bluesy sound and exotic musical textures. His sitar work on Paint It Black and marimba on Under My Thumb showcased his innovative approach to rock music. But Jones's increasing drug use and erratic behavior made him unreliable in the studio and on tour. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards began writing songs together, gradually marginalizing Jones's contributions. By 1969, Jones was barely functioning as a musician, often too intoxicated to play or simply not showing up to recording sessions. The final blow came when the band decided they needed a clean image to tour America. They met with Jones at his home and informed him that his services were no longer needed. Less than a month later, Jones was found dead in his swimming pool, making his dismissal from the band he created the final chapter in a tragic story of creative genius destroyed by excess. 8. Dennis DeYoung, Styx. For over 30 years, Dennis DeYoung was the theatrical voice and creative vision behind Styx's arena rock spectacles. His operatic vocals powered hits like Lady and Come Sail Away, while his elaborate stage productions turned concerts into Broadway-style productions. But by the late 1990s, his bandmates had grown tired of his controlling nature and desired to pursue increasingly theatrical concepts. The breaking point came when DeYoung's battle with chronic fatigue syndrome forced him to miss several tours. Rather than wait for their frontman's recovery, the remaining members of Styx made the heartless decision to replace him permanently with Lawrence Gowan. They argued that DeYoung's health issues made him unreliable, but many saw it as a convenient excuse to rid themselves of his dominating creative influence. DeYoung learned of his dismissal through media reports rather than direct communication from his longtime bandmates, adding insult to injury after 3 decades of partnership. 9. Roger Waters, Pink Floyd. The irony of Roger Waters' situation is that he essentially fired himself from Pink Floyd, only to spend decades fighting his former bandmates over the right to use the name. As the creative mastermind behind concept albums like The Dark Side of the Moon and The Wall, Waters had gradually assumed complete control over the band's artistic direction. By the early 1980s, Waters' ego and controlling behavior had alienated David Gilmour, Nick Mason, and Rick Wright. When Waters declared Pink Floyd finished after the final cut, he expected his bandmates to accept the band's dissolution. Instead, they decided to continue without him, leading to bitter legal battles over the Pink Floyd name and catalog. Waters' attempt to kill the band he had dominated backfired spectacularly, as Pink Floyd's post-Waters albums proved commercially successful while his solo career struggled to match his former band's popularity. 10. Ace Frehley. Kiss. Ace Frehley's dismissal from Kiss represents one of rock's most prolonged and painful separations.
Anyway, it goes something like this while I'm doing my guitar.
He told me it wasn't loaded.
I told my guitar.
As the Space Ace, Frehley provided the lead guitar firepower and rebellious attitude that made Kiss a global phenomenon. His solos on songs like Shock Me and Cold Gin were essential elements of the band's hard rock sound. But Frehley's struggles with alcohol and his increasing unreliability frustrated Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley. By the early 1980s, he was frequently missing recording sessions and concerts, forcing the band to use session musicians and stand-ins. Rather than fire him outright, Kiss gradually phased him out, reducing his role on albums and limiting his stage time. The final insult came when they replaced him with Vinnie Vincent without officially announcing his departure, leaving fans confused about Frehley's status. This passive-aggressive dismissal was perhaps more cruel than an honest firing, as it denied Frehley the dignity of a clean break from the band that made him famous. These 10 stories prove that the music industry can be as brutal as any corporate boardroom when money and egos collide. From Pete Best's devastating phone call to Roger Waters' self-inflicted exile, each dismissal changed not just individual careers, but the entire trajectory of rock history. The bands that fired these musicians went on to achieve massive success, but at what cost to their souls and artistic integrity? What's your take on these brutal band breakups? Do you think any of these firings were justified, or were they simply cruel betrayals of artistic partnerships? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more shocking stories from rock and roll's dark side. Hit that notification bell because trust me, you won't want to miss what we're uncovering next week about the music industry's most scandalous secrets.